July 14, 1943, 0847 hours. Hauptmann Franz Stiegler emptied his entire ammunition belt into a Soviet IL-2 Sturmovik at 200 meters range, watched his bullets hit, counted the impacts. 187 rounds. The Sturmovik didn't explode, didn't catch fire, didn't even wobble. It just kept flying toward the German tank column below. Stiegler had never seen anything like it. What he didn't know was that the Soviet pilot was sitting inside 700 kilograms of armored steel, a flying bathtub that made the IL-2 nearly impossible to kill. This is the story of how Soviet engineers built an aircraft that German pilots called the cement bomber. How one design decision, wrapping the entire cockpit in armor plate, created the most produced combat aircraft in history, and how 36,000 armored bathtubs changed the Eastern Front forever. But first, you need to understand why German fighters couldn't shoot down an aircraft that flew slower, turned worse, and had less firepower than anything else in the sky. The Ilyushin IL-2 Sturmovik was designed in 1938 with one purpose: ground attack, close air support, flying low over battlefields, destroying tanks, trucks, and infantry. The problem with ground attack aircraft was obvious. They flew low, they flew slow, and everything on the ground shot at them. German 20 mm flak, 37 mm cannons, small arms fire, tank machine guns, rifle bullets. Standard ground attack doctrine said armor the pilot, protect the engine, hope for the best. But Soviet designer Sergei Ilyushin had a different idea. What if the armor wasn't bolted onto the aircraft? What if the armor was the aircraft? The IL-2's entire forward fuselage was an armored shell, not armor plates attached to the frame. The armor was the frame. Load-bearing armor, structural armor. The cockpit, engine, fuel tanks, and cooling system all sat inside a 700-kilogram steel bathtub. The armor varied in thickness: 4 mm on the sides, 6 mm on the bottom, 12 mm on the back of the pilot's head. The front windscreen was 65 mm armored glass, bulletproof. The entire shell was welded from shaped steel plates, no rivets, no bolts, just one continuous armored shell. Soviet pilots called it the flying tank. German pilots called it the cement bomber. The cement bomber, because shooting at it felt like shooting at concrete. If you want to see how effective 700 kilograms of armor was against German fighters and flak, hit that like button right now and subscribe. What happens next will show you why Stalin called the IL-2 as essential as air and bread to the Red Army. Back to Stiegler. July 14, 1943. Battle of Kursk. The largest tank battle in history. 6,000 tanks, 4,000 aircraft. The Germans launched Operation Citadel. The Soviets threw everything they had at the German panzers, including 400 IL-2 Sturmoviks. Hauptmann Franz Stiegler flew a Focke-Wulf FW-190. 23 confirmed kills. Experienced pilot. He'd shot down Soviet fighters before. Yaks, Legies, MiGs. They burned like any other aircraft. But he'd never engaged an IL-2 in sustained combat. At 8:40 hours, he spotted a formation of 8 IL-2s attacking German positions near Poniri, flying at 150 meters altitude. Slow, vulnerable, perfect targets. Stiegler dove from 2,000 meters, closed to 300 meters, opened fire with his 20mm cannons and 13mm machine guns. His rounds hit the lead IL-2. Sparks flew off the fuselage. The aircraft didn't react, didn't smoke, didn't dive, just kept flying straight toward the German tanks. Stiegler closed to 200 meters, fired again. More hits, more sparks, nothing. He broke left, climbed, came around for another pass. This time he aimed for the engine. The BMW radial was the vulnerable point. Kill the engine, the aircraft goes down. He fired a 5-second burst. 187 rounds total. He was close enough to see the bullets hitting, see the impacts walking across the armored cowling. The IL-2's engine kept running. The propeller kept turning. The aircraft kept flying. Stigler was out of ammunition. He pulled up, watched the IL-2 continue its attack run, watched it drop its bombs on German tanks, watched it strafe infantry with its 23mm cannons. Then it turned east and flew home. Stigler couldn't understand what he'd just witnessed. 187 hits, no effect. It violated everything he knew about aerial combat. What Stigler didn't know was that his bullets had hit armor designed specifically to stop them. The IL-2's armor shell could withstand 12.7mm bullets from any angle. It could survive 20mm cannon hits from the rear quarter. From directly behind, where most fighter attacks came from, it had 12mm armor. Stigler's 20mm rounds had hit. They'd sparked. They'd penetrated the outer skin in some places. But they hadn't reached the pilot, hadn't reached the engine, hadn't done anything except scratch the paint. The Soviet pilot in that IL-2, Senior Lieutenant Ivan Pavlov, landed at his airfield near Kursk at 09:20 hours. His ground crew counted the damage: 187 bullet and cannon holes, 13 20mm impacts. The tail section looked like a sieve. But the armored bathtub was intact. The engine ran. The controls worked. Pavlov climbed out, lit a cigarette, reported the German tank positions he'd attacked. Then he climbed back in and flew another sortie at 1100 hours. This wasn't unusual. IL-2 pilots routinely returned with hundreds of bullet holes. The record was 213 hits on a single aircraft. Pilots survived. Aircraft flew again the next day. The armor worked so well that IL-2 loss rates were lower than Soviet fighters, despite flying into concentrated ground fire every mission. German fighter pilots hated engaging IL-2s. It took too much ammunition. The IL-2 rear gunner made tail attacks dangerous. And even if you hit the armor repeatedly, the aircraft just kept flying. Luftwaffe tactical manuals issued specific instructions for IL-2 engagement. Attack from below. Aim for the oil cooler under the engine. That was the weak spot. Or attack from the front quarter. The armored glass windscreen could crack under sustained fire. But most German fighters couldn't get below an IL-2 during an attack run. The Sturmovik flew too low, 50 to 150 meters. German fighters diving from above couldn't pull out in time if they went below the IL-2. So they attacked from behind, and the armor stopped everything. The Eastern Front was a war of attrition. The Soviets built 36,183 IL-2s between 1941 and 1945, more than any other combat aircraft in history. They lost 11,000 in combat. That's a 30% loss rate over 4 years. For an aircraft that flew into ground fire every single mission, that was acceptable, especially when each IL-2 destroyed an average of 8 German tanks or vehicles before being shot down. The Germans tried everything to counter the IL-2. They developed the HS-129 ground attack aircraft with heavy armor. But it was underpowered and unreliable. They modified Ju-87 Stukas with armor, but the Stuka was obsolete and vulnerable. They tried using heavy flak, 37mm and 88mm guns. Those worked. A direct hit from an 88mm shell would destroy an IL-2, but 88mm flak was scarce on the front lines. By 1944, German tank crews feared the IL-2 more than any other Soviet weapon. They called it the Black Death, Schwarzer Tod, because IL-2s hunted in packs, 8 to 12 aircraft. They'd circle a German column and attack from multiple directions. Rockets, bombs, 23mm cannons. The German tanks couldn't run, couldn't hide, could only shoot back and hope. The IL-2's success came down to one design decision: make the armor structural. Sergei Ilyushin had argued with Soviet aviation officials for 2 years about this. They wanted a light ground attack aircraft, fast and maneuverable. Ilyushin wanted a flying tank. He won the argument in 1940. Stalin personally approved the armored bathtub design. The decision saved thousands of Soviet pilots. The armor added 700 kilograms to the aircraft weight, made it slower, made it less maneuverable. But it brought pilots home. And in a war where the Soviet Union lost 27 million people, bringing pilots home mattered. Franz Stiegler survived the war. 28 kills. He never forgot the IL-2 that absorbed 187 rounds and kept flying. After the war, he became an aerospace engineer, worked on armored helicopter designs. He told interviewers the IL-2 taught him that sometimes armor matters more than speed. Sometimes survival matters more than performance. The last IL-2 combat mission flew in 1954 during the Korean War. North Korean forces used leftover Soviet aircraft. After that, the Sturmovik retired, but its legacy continued. Every modern attack helicopter, Apache, Hind, Cobra, uses armored crew compartments. The concept of the armored bathtub cockpit started with the IL-2. Today, 15 IL-2s survive in museums. The Russian Air Force Museum in Monino has one you can walk around. The armored bathtub is on display. You can see how thick the steel is. See how it wraps completely around the cockpit. See the bullet impacts still visible in the armor plate. When you touch that armor, you're touching the reason 36,000 of these aircraft were built. The reason German pilots called it the cement bomber. The reason Stalin said it was as essential as air and bread. Because in a war where everything tried to kill you, sitting in 700 kilograms of steel gave you a chance to come home. Sometimes the best innovations aren't about going faster or flying higher. Sometimes they're about building a bathtub strong enough to keep you alive when 187 bullets hit you at once. And sometimes that's enough to change a war. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a favor, hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing forgotten stories every week. Stories about engineers who built flying tanks and pilots who flew them into hell. Drop a comment right now. Tell us where you're watching from. United States, Russia, Germany, Poland. Our community is global. You're keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if family served. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching. And thank you for making sure the IL-2 Sturmovik and the pilots who flew it don't disappear into silence.